Penelope,
I do not wish to speak with you.
please.
If there was one scene we all awaited as Bridgerton fans, it was the carriage scene, since it is perhaps the most critical one in romancing Mr. Bridgerton. The famous carriage moment in the book happens right after Colin finds out Penelope is Lady Whistledown. So the scene is filled with anger and tension, with Colin being angry at Penelope for all she did as the writer, and Penelope being proud of herself and her journey. It's such a sexy and fulfilling part of the book, which means my expectations were high, and let me tell you, I was not disappointed. Even though Colin had not learned Penelope's secret identity yet, and the stakes weren't that high before the carriage scene, I still loved every moment of this scene. I believe it was perfect, not only because it was so sexy and romantic and literally showed Colin on his knees, but also because it was the first time this season that we saw Colin being fully himself. You could see the facade breaking down as his face showed his true feelings in that carriage. I'll explain this and more in a minute. Let me review Bridgerton Season 3 Part 1 first and tell you what I think this season lacked compared to the previous ones. And then we can talk about the carriage scene. Let's go. Part 1 Review. If I have to be perfectly honest with you, I found the season opener slightly underwhelming. Most of the time, the dialogue wasn't that interesting to me, and we saw too many characters in such a short time, so it felt like storylines were cramped. By episodes 2 and 3, things got better, especially with the dialogue, and more exciting things started to happen with the introduction of John Sterling and Cressida's backstory, which was depressing as fuck if you don't mind my language. But still, a few storylines this season didn't seem like they belonged in Season 3, such as the storyline with the Mondrich family. I get that they didn't want to get rid of Mr. Mondrich and his wife, but their storyline took time and space and didn't connect well to the rest of the characters' stories. It felt a little forced, and I believe we should normalize just getting rid of certain characters that won't add anything to the story. The same could be said about the Lady Danbury, Marcus, and Violet storyline.
I believe this is yours.
Thank you.
I understand that Violet can also find love and happiness at her age, but this could have been left to future seasons as there were already so many things going on for so many characters. To me, the writers wanted to give every character in the story a full-on storyline, but forgot that the season should mainly focus on one main couple, Colin and Penelope, who did not have as many scenes as one would expect. There were storylines that I very much enjoyed, such as the Featherington sisters' journey of learning how to have sex. I loved how unserious and funny that storyline was. Prudence's facial expressions were my favorite. I also like Cressida's backstory, to be honest. Before this season, she was more or less a one-dimensional character, a bully who wanted to get married. Still, Season 3 showed her family dynamics and why she is the way she is, and I thought that exploration was done very well. Overall, I expected the Lady Whistledown tension to be higher, but they left that part of the story to Part 2. Now, to my favorite scene in Part 1, the carriage scene, and why I think it's perfect. Analysis of the carriage scene. I have seen similar sentiments in many online comments about why Colin is quite unlikable this season. The comments are usually about saying he's not the same Colin we saw in the previous seasons, which is something I agree with. However, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, and it was done intentionally to make the carriage scene and his confession of love much more emotionally raw and exciting. From his first appearance in the season, Colin appears more mature-looking, rakish, and chatty, especially in his encounters with young women. From the beginning, it feels like we're watching a completely different character, both physically and character-wise. He moves differently, and overall, he behaves differently compared to the Colin we saw in the previous 2 seasons. A 4-month journey will not change a person this much, as the others also asked what really happened in his travels that made him such a changed person. Penelope, aka Lady Whistledown, is the only person who immediately understands that this is all a ruse on Colin's part. He's only acting, playing a part. I got the impression that he was lost during his travels, not physically, but mentally, as maybe he felt that his travels would change something about him, and when that did not happen, he put on an act to appear like someone who can swoon ladies with his confidence and like someone who can easily have threesomes. Of course, this didn't seem like the right Colin because it wasn't. We are meant to feel like it doesn't suit him because it doesn't. He feels it, and Lady Whistledown feels it right in episode 1. She writes in her pamphlet asking whether Colin Bridgerton's new character is really himself or just a ploy.
Character the real him, or simply a ploy for attention?
And Colin understands that he is caught, and that's why he gets pretty angry at Lady Whistledown. We know he had previous resentment for what Lady Whistledown did to Marina. Still, he was much more furious after reading her words about him, which tells me Lady Whistledown was right in questioning whether he was playing a part rather than being himself. Additionally, the carriage scene is the first scene in the entire first part of season 3 in which Colin is totally being himself. I felt like the facade was going down each time he realized he was in love with Penelope, like when he couldn't have sex with the two women, or especially when he talked back at his bros when they were speaking too openly about their sexual adventures. He asked them whether they didn't find it tiring and lonely to act like that, which meant he had been acting like that too, but was tired of it once he realized his love for Penelope. He was not being himself, but instead acting like what he thought he should be acting like. That's the whole point of his transformation towards the end of part 1. He becomes himself once he stops trying to be someone he's not. Step by step, we see the revelation of his true character, Colin, whom we have seen and loved so far. The carriage was the ultimate reveal of his true nature.
I have spent so long trying to feel less, trying to be the kind of man society expects me to be. And for a moment, I thought I had succeeded.
His big, scared puppy eyes showed us what he was truly looking for, love and compassion, rather than the attention and momentary pleasures that would come from his encounters with other women. In the carriage scene, he finally opens up, but his true feelings and his words should go down in the history of Bridgerton's confession of love scenes. Feelings like dreaming of you when I'm asleep, and in fact, preferring sleep because that is where I might find you. A feeling that is like torture, but one which I cannot, will not, do not want to give up. I mean, come on. Besides the words, his face just tells you who he is. The way he yearns for Penelope, looking at her mouth, being on his knees, and trying to persuade her of his love. In my opinion, the scene was executed perfectly, and that chemistry between the two actors, it was so realistic. I couldn't believe what I was watching. They made everything look so believable and raw. And I don't know if this is too early to say this, but this could very well be my favorite making out scene in the entire Bridgerton. It didn't look like Luke and Nicola to me. I just saw Colin and Penelope, which is such a rare thing to find on TV shows, don't you think? In the end, I know some people won't be happy with the changes from the books. In fact, I would also rather Colin learn about Penelope's secret job first, but I still enjoyed this scene in part 1 overall. To be perfectly honest, my favorite part of part 1 was about Francesca and John's relationship. They became one of my favorite couples so soon. But anyway, I want you to tell me your own thoughts about the carriage scene and whether it lived up to your expectations. By the way, the spoilers and leaks I mentioned in previous videos were right for the most part. Go check those videos out if you want to get spoiled for part 2. See you soon.